The following text is taken from an article in the Radio Times magazine, from the 3rd of May 1973 and entitled Could It Happen Here?
Friday's new BBC One serial is about secret and fictitious moves towards an independent Scotland. Julie Davidson talked to Scottish activists, and George Rosie asked members of the cast. Could it happen here?
Scotch on the Rocks. Friday, BBC One, colour.
Some months ago, an Edinburgh court heard the case of a youth charged with attempting to set fire to St Andrew's House, seat of the administration of Scotland. Before their selection, the jurors were questioned on their attitudes to Scottish nationalism. In Scotch on the Rocks, there is a more successful attempt to fire St Andrew's House. But could any of the events in the play really happen? With the Scottish National Party growing in strength and political force, it is certainly possible that they could democratically win the support of a majority of Scots. And there are certainly people prepared to resort to more extreme methods, although not necessarily violent ones. 82-year-old Wendy Wood, leader of the Scottish Patriots Association and veteran of many an extravagant nationalist campaign and protest, is one of them. "I have no doubt," she says, "that Scotland is well worth giving your life for." Last winter she started a fast to the death, which she abandoned only after she received an assurance from the Secretary of State that the government would produce a green paper on the Scottish Assembly. "I do believe we still need a national defence force, a corps of reliable and steady patriots who will defend our right to self-government. I don't believe we could get any recruits from the Scottish regiments." One does hear occasional rumours of a secret Scottish army, but even the extremist 1320 Club, splinter group and perpetual sparring partner of the SNP, denies its existence. The 1320 Club takes a strong line on complete independence, but refuses to reveal its strength in numbers. Its current patron, the poet Hugh MacDiarmid, has stated publicly that armed action might be forced on the Scots. "There is a good deal of violence in Scotland today and I wish it could be channeled in better directions," he said in 1968. The date is significant, about the time that Douglas Hurd and Andrew Osmond were preparing the theme of Scotch on the Rocks. But it is a theme which the SNP never found plausible and which their vice-chairman Gordon Wilson rejects. The whole context of politics has changed in Scotland over the past few years. Now we have great financial potential, we have the interest of businessmen who believe that Scotland should control oil, and the possibility of Westminster becoming dependent on us. If we won the support of the majority, then England would not be able to dictate terms for self-government as in the story. Gordon Wilson, the 34-year-old Paisley solicitor who came within 1,141 votes of a SNP seat at the Dundee East by-election, is very much the young, middle-class intellectual attracted by the SNP these days. It is highly improbable that violence could break out at the stage described in the story. Compared with Ireland, even Wales, we have never had any real descent into violence in the nationalist movement. We are not an excitable people. Bob Tolt, editor of Scottish International, a fairly radical monthly magazine of current events and the arts, believes that the real political strength of Scotland is the voice of an inbuilt radicalism, and somehow the Scottish Nationalist Party has lost the ability to communicate with it. He finds the dangerous confrontation in the story between the SNP and extremists over the question of Dominion status quite plausible. "What would worry me is an inexperienced leadership of the SNP dealing with the skilled manoeuvring of English politicians. That could create an atmosphere of great insecurity and suspicion, and the idea of armed intervention by a lunatic fringe might stimulate the English into sending in agents provocateurs to flush out the militants and reach a solution with the moderate centre politicians." Parliamentary Under-Secretary of State, Scottish Office, George Younger, disagrees. "There was a period about 20 years ago when they started blowing up pillar boxes, but I think they discovered that it turned a lot of people away from their cause. Violence isn't a very effective method of achieving one's ends." Nor does he think that there will ever be a completely independent Scottish government, as some of the nationalists would wish. There are very few Scots who would want that, and I think that even many of the people who support Scottish nationalism would recoil from a solution as drastic as that. I think that instead there will be an evolution of power moving from Westminster to Scotland. That's very necessary for everybody's sakes, both Westminster's and Scotland's. When Andrew Osmond and Douglas Hurd first wrote the novel, recalls Douglas Hurd, They were aiming primarily to write a good story. Hurd agrees with George Younger that the majority of Scots don't want home rule, though he thought the events of the book were just possible. I was a bit afraid that the book might have caused some alarm, he says now, but in fact it didn't. I very much doubt if the television play will prove disturbing.